Hi, I'm Jackie Tantillo, and this is Should Have Listened to My Mother. Everyone has a very specific story to tell. As you all know, as my listeners, this podcast is about mother-son, mother-daughter relationships. It's about the maternal bond between two people, whether biological or not. Who did you have in your life that did or didn't play this role for you, this maternal role? My guest wrote a powerful and moving post on social media that caught my eye, stemming from a horrific historical event. So I'd like to begin, before I introduce my guest, I'd like to read a few of the comments related to the post. First one coming from Matthew. Matthew wrote, "Thank you for sharing this heartfelt dedication to your mother. Its implications reach far deeper than a son's introspective acknowledgement of a parent's positive influence. This post is a timely reminder that the force of human will can defeat the impossible force of tyranny." And Martha Delahanty wrote, "Success is defined in so many ways. She was born at the right time. Just a different time than this. She is here for such a time as this, and she forever changed the world for good. Her impact alone is remarkable. This post shows the power of her impact, the power of good over evil, and the power of one amazing woman." And I get the chills every time I read that. April 27th and 28th are Holocaust Remembrance Day, or Yom HaShoah, in the Jewish faith. And my guest wrote a post dedicated to his mother. And my guest is Vice President and Deputy General Counsel, Labor and Employment at Verizon. So it's an honor, Jonathan Ramsfelder, to have you as a guest on Should Have Listened to My Mother.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you. I'm really moved by just hearing those words as well. Thanks.
You touched so many people with this story of your mom and sharing it and bringing it to light. And yes, there's the historical reference, which the world should never forget and never stop teaching. What's even more significant is all that your mother accomplished with not very much. Actually, both of your parents were refugees, and they overcame unprecedented hardship. Over time, they proved themselves proud, resilient, and unstoppable, and that's just the beginning. So how about if we start with getting to know your mom, and please tell us your mother's name.
Ruth Ramsfelder. Her maiden name is Ruth. It's Ruth Schwarzschild. And
your mom is still with us, or has she
Yes.
passed?
Uh-huh. No, she's still with us. A force of nature, lives in a senior independent living facility not too far away from where I live. She moved there after my dad his health was failing, and they moved into this facility, and it's a very comfortable place, and it's a great place because it's so close to where we live, and we get to spend a lot of time with her. I should probably spend more time with my mom, but we do get to spend a lot of time with her.
Oh, good. I asked you before we started the interview if you had a copy of your LinkedIn story that I read. So you mentioned you did not, so it's okay for me to read it so my listeners get an idea of a little bit about your mom's past. So you begin, "This is a photo of me and my mom, Ruth Ramsfelder, the last Jewish person born in her hometown of Wertheim am Main in Germany. Tonight and tomorrow mark Holocaust Remembrance Day, in Hebrew, Yom HaShoah. This is a photo of a Holocaust survivor and her son, myself, a product of two refugees who experienced childhood trauma through persecution, dislocation, the murder of their family members, and upon arriving in the U.S. in 1938 and 39, my mom and dad, respectively, poverty. This is a photo of a woman who didn't have the opportunity to advance her education beyond high school, but who is one of the most intelligent people, IQ and EQ, I have ever met. Resilience, positive outlook, compassion for others, kindness, and good decision-making are her signature attributes, along with networking and relationship-building skills that could have catapulted her to the top of the corporate ladder had she been born 60 years later, and not in a country bent on marginalizing and ultimately exterminating all of its Jewish citizens. This is a photo that proves that Hitler lost. The Jewish people are still here and that we will continue on. This is a photo of the last Jewish baby born in Wertheim am Main. So here you wrote this beautiful piece, and again, every time I read it, I get the chills. So I want you to please tell me what moved you on this remembrance, this Holocaust Remembrance Day of 2022 to write this.
Yeah, so I think, a lot of Holocaust memorials and writing, they're devastating in the sadness and the memory of trauma, in the bitterness. And over time, in observing my mom, in observing my own connection to Germany as a human being, I realized it's a mixed story. And I wanted to basically use the Holocaust to show that they're survivors or refugees that have made great lives and great impacts. And for me, the impact is on having her as my mom. So I wanted to really almost celebrate the defeat of Adolf Hitler through the success and self-actualization of someone who I really look up to and from whom I benefited.
So I want to go back to when she was a little girl. She had an education of just a couple of grades, correct?
Yeah, she came to the United States. I think she was, 1 year old, 1938, and she went through high school. She lived in Washington Heights, New York, which is where all the German refugees lived. Came with her parents and with her brother, and they grew up, as did my father's family, in poverty. I mean, my grandparents didn't have the normal employment, the normal upper middle class lifestyle they enjoyed as cattle dealers in Germany. They worked as painters, manual laborers, dishwashers, maids, and she was raised by parents who suffered that kind of trauma, but who were happy to be alive. And my maternal grandparents, her parents, were these lovely, embracing of life people who I remember so sweetly from my childhood. They weren't around. I think they passed away when I was maybe before I was 9 years old. But I remember them being just really kind-hearted, smiling. And those are the kinds of parents that my mom remarkably was raised by, even with the deep trauma that they all suffered and that they all experienced.
They were working really hard. They didn't have much, the luxuries, right, that we think of every day, and yet they were still able to have a smile on their face.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's very, I look back and, there's so much to learn. My mom grew up probably in a very structured environment, raised by these two traumatized refugees who were doing their best. And what they had was the opportunity to educate themselves and the opportunity to embrace one another. And I think the solidity of the relationship in her family, carried forward into her being a wife, being a mom. And I think at least my mom's family, their reaction was to kind of lean into one another and to have these immensely functional relationships, which really it's defying the concept of intergenerational trauma, because I think my mom in some respect broke it through her attitude and through her positive outlook.
So she doesn't carry this burden on her shoulder every day and let people know of her sufferings.
It's interesting because we've had experiences. Uh, I can't give you a clear answer to that, because what I will say is that expressing and demonstrating gratitude and contentment are my mom's hallmarks. But there have been moments where I know my mom struggles with her past. So, for example, my wife and I and my oldest son visited Germany with my sister and my brother-in-law. We were visiting her hometown where we learned this news that my mom was the last Jewish person born in this town, this beautiful medieval town, a town that I have great attraction to now, coming to grips with my German ancestry. And we shared with her that we had learned this information, that she was the last Jewish child. And I think she really got broken up, and she said, why did they hate us so much? And I think that was a moment of revealing, what she lives with. I mean, she and my dad came from trauma. And in one generation, my sister and I, thank God, it's like we broke it. So it's like, I think we're so lucky. We're like the exceptions to many, many of my contemporaries whose parents had similar experiences. In fact, some of my contemporaries, their parents were actually in the camps or were hidden children during the war. Both of my parents came to the States prior to the final solution. So they got out of Nazi Germany. Yes, they suffered a lot of trauma, but maybe that's in some respect why we're so solid as a family, and why I think my sister and I and our families are quite healthy and quite self-actualized.
Can you tell us a little bit about when your mom was a young girl and their experience? Were they living in a community with mainly Jewish families? Were they speaking Yiddish?
Yes. So
Hebrew?
They were speaking. I think my mom grew up in a home where her parents spoke German. But of course, the key to success in the United States was education. And I think my mom's parents insisted that she be a really good student. And my mom is really brilliant. I mean, she is really, really book smart. I mean, she knows. You want someone to play like Trivial Pursuit with you. She'll know every category: art, culture, history, and she met my dad in her early 20s. They got married. My mom worked as a laboratory technologist at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. So she probably went to a trade school of sorts. I don't think, the opportunity to go to college was probably front and center for her. But what I sense, at least from knowing my grandparents as a young child, is that she grew up in a real loving home. Maybe not with a lot of resources, but a really healthy, a really emotionally healthy home. And her cousins, the whole Schwarzschild clan from which she came, they're an amazing bunch of people. They're all living in the United States now. I have second and third cousins that are all from the Schwarzschild clan. There's something about that family. Maybe it comes from the town from which they came, the success they had in business in the town, because we've gone back and we've learned about what the family did. They were cattle dealers of some prominence, and they just are like healthy, successful, super smart people. And yeah, I mean, I feel like kind of the benefit of the Schwarzschild clan rubbed off on the Ramsfelder children, and my mom's. I would say my mom, grew up really as a caretaker to my dad, who I think had greater trauma from the Holocaust. He actually experienced Crystal Night. He saw his neighbors burn down his synagogue. He was thrown out of school. He came here when he was 6 years old, but what he experienced between, childbirth and 6 years old was horrifying. And again, he wasn't in the camps. He didn't lose his parents, but I think he suffered a lot of trauma. And I think he was raised in a family with more trauma. And I think my mom I mean, not only is she remarkable, she's a healer because they had a successful marriage. They raised two emotionally healthy children. And I think it's by the force of my mom's personality. And like I said, she's a force of nature. I mean, that's what I think about her.
Can I ask, your mom's grandparents, were they left behind when your mom's...
Yes. And to talk about my mom's personal trauma, my mom always recounts that her mom, so it's my Uma Meta. That was, we call grandparents Uma and Upa. So my Uma Meta would always say to my mom how much guilt she had that she left her parents in Germany. So yes, my mom lost her grandparents. They were murdered. So again, but yet, you interact with my mom, people interact with her. They wouldn't know that she experienced these life experiences because she is just really put together cognitively, great at getting advice, great reader of people, not a judger of people, but kind of a reader and someone that could give you advice on how to interact with people. And the funny part, at least for me, is I'm kind of a natural networker or connector of people. And I totally get that from my mom. I mean, 100%. If my mom was born in a different day, she would be an executive recruiter. She'd be the head of human resources for a company. She is an incredible emotional connector. She's empathetic. She lifts people up. You interact with her, you feel like you're very important. And these are the personality traits that I had in my mother. I mean, I'm incredibly lucky.
So your role model was incredibly powerful and instrumental in you becoming who you are today.
Yeah. Yes, I think, when I was a little kid and we would be at events, my mom would always want to introduce me to people and she would go out of her way to say hi to people. And I was a little kid and my sister and I were always roundly embarrassed about how outgoing and extroverted my mom is. I am exactly the same.
And you do the same thing to your kids, right?
100%. 100%.
Oh, my boys do the same thing to me when hey, come on over here. I want to introduce you to blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But that's how they learn, right?
Yeah, that's how I learned. Listen, for me, it translates like into my career. I mean, it's, a lot of my career is building relationships. And, that's from my mom.
What was it like holidays in your house? Was your mom a cook?
Fantastic. So Shabbat and holidays, like it was always like the home where we would always have guests. My friends who are still my friends from childhood have all these memories of sitting around, our house on Friday night and on holidays. And so, yes, it was wonderful. And my parents always hosted people. And my mom, she wasn't a fancy cook, but she made some food that is incredibly memorable. Like her crispy chicken is something that I think about. My sister makes it, and it's just like one of the most delicious like foods I ever.
Oh, that's so wonderful when you can share what you have, and especially bringing people to the table and sharing a meal. It just seems it's like a Fellini movie, the memories that I have with my family and generations before, there's something about sitting down to that table for a meal. There's nothing like it. So everyone would come to your house. And did your mom and dad go out? Did they dance? Did they go to listen to music?
So it's interesting. My dad, I think, is by nature way more introverted. He passed away, but I would say that their marriage was built on, I think, a lot of shared experiences. They were raised in the same community. I mean, now in the United States, like my wife, yeah, she's from New Jersey, but we have very different backgrounds, and we built a family based upon maybe some of our differences. I think my parents' marriage was very much based upon a lot of shared experiences, and I think that their marriage, that they were still kind of recovering from what they had experienced as young children and what their parents had experienced. And so we grew up in a home that I would say was extremely structured. We never did without. I would say my parents were very firmly kind of middle class. But we didn't have nearly the resources that my family has today. But we had love. I had parents that were always my cheerleaders. They always challenged me to do well in school. And the other thing that I benefited from that I don't think my kids have is the apprehension and the anxiety of disappointing them. Because I knew, and my sister knew in that home, that to disappoint my parents with the lives that they had would be kind of a double trauma. And so that in itself was a source of encouragement and ambition, frankly. I mean, it's like you could say it's like a form of guilt, but it actually did kind of propel our desire to be successful, to have successful families, to have solid relationships with our spouses and with our kids. And I think, when I see my mom, I think my mom has a lot of pride in what I've accomplished and what my sister has accomplished. And it's clearly not limited to professionally. It's about how we built our families. And I think that is directly attributable to what we learned from her.
Yeah, you had a motivation. God forbid you ever would have disappointed or let your parents down, considering what they had been exposed to, experienced, right? That would shatter their world. Like, are you serious? Really?
Yes.
And I'm curious in how you raised your children. They must know their grandparents' history.
Absolutely.
Is it a constant reminder? Like you said, they don't have that same motivation, but based on what I know of you and I'm learning today, they obviously understand the significance of it and where your family has come and the building blocks that they've used to be where they are today.
I think that's precisely on point. I think they know that there's a great difference, even like a chasm between the home I grew up in, the home that their Aunt Miriam grew up in, and the home that they grew up in. They're in their 20s now, and yet they appreciate where I came from, and they interacted with their Uma and Upa. I mean, they interact with Uma Ruth. They interacted with my father, who passed away, with Upa Walter, and so I think that they do have a sense of the things that I'm sharing with you. Have I sat down with them and have I described this all to them in this kind of detail? Probably not, but I think it's probably written all over my experience.
Yeah. When it comes to your relationship with your mom, is there a difference between your sister's relationship with your mom?
Really good question. I would say yes. I think, well, one thing is my sister is very much like a mentor to me. She's 4 years older than I am. And I was always like I wouldn't say the rebel, like younger child, but I'm a bit more of a partier, more introverted than my sister.
The truth comes out.
Yeah. And I would say that, so my sister, I would say, is more of the natural caretaker to my mom. And I think that my mom and I are more like, for me to take my mom to a concert is a deeply enjoyable experience, and that's the connection that I identify with my mom. It's not so much calling my mom and asking her whether she needs to go to the pharmacy to get her medication.
Mm-hmm.
I play less of that role. And I'm very lucky because these whole kind of roles and responsibilities, like they work. They work. And that's frankly part of like the structure that I grew up with in a family where my mom and dad had probably pretty set roles. And it works. It maybe simplistic, maybe it's kind of boring, but in a way it really leads to kind of healthy families. And I think that's something that I saw modeled by my parents.
Well, it kind of makes it easy. There's a line there and you know who's going to handle what. And so I'm curious, you mentioned concerts. Have you taken your mom to a concert? And if so, if not?
Most recently, this was really wonderful. So our kids went to this K-8 Jewish day school called Gottesman Academy, and Gottesman hosted the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra in their gymnasium. It's this beautiful gymnasium auditorium that the school was recently rebuilt and has incredible sound. And I went with my mom, and my mom loves classical music, and it was just a wonderful experience. I mean, the music was geared to the students in the school, so it was like educational. But every composer that they played, my mom knew what the piece was within 3 or 4 notes of each composition, and it was just like a lovely experience. And that was something that I really looked forward to taking my mom to. I knew she would enjoy it, and I immensely enjoyed being with her for that.
Can I ask about, we used to go to Yes concerts with my mom, even though we grew up listening to the opera every weekend and we had classical music on all the time, but we would go see Yes, or I can't remember who else we took her to, but she was, 7 kids later, she was like, okay, let's go have some fun. But I love when young adults like you and I take our parents somewhere, if that's still possible. So I can hone in on that big time.
Yeah, and I took a page out of your mom's playbook because I always go to concerts with my kids now. I mean,
good for you.
I've been to, maybe 5 Dead and Company shows. I've been to EDM shows with our kids, and music is definitely something that is, especially with my oldest son, that we really bond over.
Can I ask, who was the one who laid down the gauntlet? Who disciplined you as a child, your mom or your dad? Or didn't you get disciplined?
No. Oh, no, there was discipline in my house. That's maybe there's no discipline in the home with which we raised our kids. But no, there is. No, so I would say my dad was more the disciplinarian, but I would say, they had this kind of what I would say like this firm grip, which is like if something was not right, they would be unanimous in their view. So there wasn't, and I think it's much more common in families, maybe more modern families, where kids play one parent off of the other. I never really felt I had the opportunity to do that. I felt like they were lockstep, and it made it very hard for me to be manipulative to them.
Well, again, that clear line, it really helps sometimes,
It does. Yes, it does. It orders things. It actually reduces anxiety because you have less optionality. And so, I think that's an example of knowing what is expected and knowing you can't easily outmaneuver the parents.
Yeah. You wrote this beautiful story and you posted it on LinkedIn about your mother, Ruth, someone who you say always had great judgment. She overcame her childhood trauma, the loss of her family during the Holocaust, and still was able to have a warm heart and a smile on her face. Jonathan Ramsfelder, thank you so much for joining me on Should Have Listened to My Mother.
Thank you, Jackie.
And we will be back next week with another episode of Should Have Listened to My Mother. And please say hello to your mom.